Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere utterly ridiculous. 17th century Paris, where yawning in public isn't just rude, it's actually illegal. Yes, you could be fined, publicly shamed, or worse, just for opening your mouth a little too wide during a dull sermon. Honestly, you probably wouldn't survive this if you've ever yawned through a Monday Zoom call. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're watching from somewhere cozy, drop your city and current time in the comments. I love seeing where you're all curling up. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wander along the cobbled streets of Paris, dressed in a loose linen tunic if you're lucky, or a velvet coat with 24 giant buttons if fashion has betrayed you. It's around the year 1645. Candles are luxury items, perfume is survival gear, and dental care is still a myth. You step over the occasional trickle from someone's chamber pot, tossed out the window. Paris is beautiful, sure, but it smells like something died under the cobblestones and decided to stay. It's early afternoon. The rooftops are soaking up the sun and radiating that sleepy, soft heat. You pass by a butcher's stall, overhear gossip about the king's latest powdered wig, and just as a yawn tickles the back of your throat, seriously, do not even think about it. Because if a city guard catches you mid-yawn, you might be hauled off for questioning. No joke. In summary, especially near churches, courts, or royal buildings, there are official decrees warning against latitude in ding, or in plain terms, improper behavior. And yep, yawning makes the list. That's right, yawning. Don't worry, it wasn't like every French person in 1645 was forbidden from yawning 24/7. But in places where decorum mattered, cathedrals, salons, royal halls, a yawn was treated like a sneeze in an elevator with no hand covering. It wasn't just impolite, it was practically scandalous. In church, a yawn could be seen as a sign of boredom with God's word. In court, it could imply disdain for justice. And in the presence of nobility, well, you might as well be flipping them off with your tonsils. Some historians argue that this had less to do with manners and more to do with power. The upper classes were obsessed with appearances. They didn't want to look tired, uninterested, or worse, common. Yawning was considered a lower class habit, something undisciplined people did when they weren't focused enough to stay alert. To prove they were above all that, nobles made yawning a punishable offense in serious settings. And then there's the whole yawns are contagious thing. People were genuinely worried that one rogue yawn could ripple through a room and unravel the solemnity of an entire event. Imagine a packed church where one altar boy yawns, and suddenly the whole choir is mid-stretch with watery eyes. It's comedic gold today, but back then, it was a decorum disaster. So yeah, welcome to a city where a badly timed breath could land you in trouble. And in the next section, you're about to meet someone who found that out the hard way. Python? Sao Chep? Ching Sua? You find yourself standing just outside a crowded courtroom in central Paris. The air is stiff with incense and powdered wigs. You're not here for a scandalous trial about treason or stolen jewel snow. Today's drama is about a man who committed the unthinkable. He yawned. Not just anywhere, of course. He yawned right in front of a minor, nobly an aging viscount with an ego as tall as his feathered hat. The victim, if you can call him that, claims he was gravely insulted by the display of open-mouthed fatigue. The culprit? A baker. 30 years old, sleep-deprived, flour still clinging to his collar. Let's call him Claude. Claude insists he meant no harm. He'd been baking since 3 in the morning and was only at the courthouse because he was summoned to testify in a property dispute, something about whose oven was technically built first. All very exciting stuff. He stood respectfully at the back of the room, blinked slowly, and stretched his jaw once. That was it. One yawn. Not even a noisy one. No sound, no stretch, no opera-worthy jaw crack. Just a quiet, involuntary, biological reflex. But the Viscount? Oh, he treated it like a duel had been declared. He demanded immediate actions, summoned the guards, pointed dramatically like he was in a play. This man mocks the dignity of this chamber, he shouted, which, frankly, is impressive considering how boring the chamber actually is. You sneak into the back row as the clerk reads out the charge. Public display of disdainful fatigue in the presence of nobility. A real mouthful, and ironically, something you might yawn at yourself. Claude stands there looking exhausted but calm. When asked if he regrets his actions, he replies, "I regret working 17 hours a day for people who think yawning is rebellion." It gets a quiet chuckle from someone in the audience, quickly shushed. Now, here's where things get weird. Instead of a fine or a few hours in the stocks, the magistrate decides Claude should issue a public apology in verse. That's right, a poem, written by hand. Delivered aloud in the same courtroom the following Sunday. It's either punishment or open mic night. Historians still argue whether this sort of sentence was typical, or if Claude just got unlucky with a judge who had strong opinions about etiquette and amateur poetry. But cases like this weren't as rare as you'd hope. There were documented rules in certain Parisian boroughs about behavior in official settings. Things like sneezing, sighing, fidgeting, or yawning could be interpreted as acts of disrespect. And since nobility were basically allergic to anything that broke their precious image of grace, these laws gave them just enough excuse to maintain their bubble. Claude's case ends with him bowing deeply and carefully not yawning as he's dismissed until his poetry reading. You follow him outside, half expecting him to mutter about leaving France forever. But he just shrugs, pulls out a small notebook, and starts scribbling rhymes under his breath. You have to admit it's hard to be mad at someone who turns punishment into poetry. And as the city bells chime in the distance, you wonder just how many others have suffered similar fates over something as ordinary and as uncontrollable as a yawn. You wander through a narrow alleyway, dodging laundry lines and the occasional goat, and the smell hits you first. Paris, for all its grandeur, is pungent. It's a mix of whetstone, cured meat, sweat, incense, and a kind of musty perfume nobles use to cover everything else. The city doesn't just smell tired, it is tired. And suddenly, the yawning ban starts to make a little more twisted sense. See, in the 17th century, hygiene wasn't exactly thriving. Bathing was still a highly suspicious activity, rumored to open the body's pores to disease. Most people avoided water like the plague, partly because of the actual plague. Instead, folks relied on thick layers of perfume, satchels of herbs, and if you were really fancier, pocket handkerchiefs scented with lavender or clove. You stroll past a row of nobles adjusting their lace collars and powdering their faces with something vaguely chalk-like. These are the people most obsessed with appearances, and also the ones with the strongest opinions on yawning. Because here's the thing, yawning wasn't just seen as rude or lazy. Thanks to some highly imaginative theories of the time, it was also considered unsanitary. People genuinely believed yawning allowed bad vapors to escape the body, or worse, let evil ones in. A gaping mouth was a vulnerability, an open portal, a scandalous orifice. One midwife reportedly advised her clients to sleep with their mouths tied shut, not for snoring, but to prevent wandering spirits from entering through a late-night yawn. Historians still argue whether this was superstition or just an early version of mouth taping. But beyond ghost paranoia, there was a deeper social fear at play. The fear of appearing human, that is, sweaty, sleepy, imperfect, and yawning, well, it's about as human as it gets. If you were a noble trying to look angelic, untouchable, and scented like roses, the last thing you wanted was to be reminded that people get tired. Yawning exposed weakness, and weakness was contagious. As you pass a group of servants scrubbing steps with vinegar and lemon rinds, you overhear two women debating whether yawning means your soul is stretching. One insists it's the body's way of rejecting boredom, the other says it's proof you've been cursed by envy. It's both poetic and wildly impractical. And yet, that fear of public imperfection had power. Laws don't pop out of nowhere. They grow from collective anxieties, some real, some ridiculous. The upper classes, especially, were desperate to preserve an image of control. They were expected to glide, not stumble, to smile, not sigh, to radiate charm, not fatigue. So, what better way to draw the line between us and them than to criminalize something natural, something the poor couldn't help but do after a long day's work? something the nobles could punish while pretending they never did it themselves. Of course, that wasn't exactly true. We'll get to their secret yawns later. But for now, you duck into a small cafe where the air is thick with roasting chicory and burnt bread. The baker's assistant is yawning openly boldly even. No viscounts here, no lace. Just tired people, being tired. And as you settle in with a warm mug in hand, you start to understand. The yawning ban wasn't really about noise, or posture, or even hygiene. It was about class. You leave the cozy cafe behind and drift toward one of Paris's more refined neighborhoods, where the buildings lean just a little straighter and the windows are trimmed in gold. Here, yawning isn't just discouraged, it's actively strategized against. You slip quietly into the back of a drawing room, where a group of powdered aristocrats are gathered for a salona kind of intellectual hangout, where poetry is read, music is played, and someone always ends up talking about ancient Greece, even if no one asked. A young man is mid-sonnet when you notice it, a flicker of tension across the face of a guest near the window. Her eyes glass over, shoulders slump slightly, and… yes, there it is, the dreaded yawn creeping up behind her eyes like a slow fog. She fights it. Oh, how she fights it. First comes the discreet nose rub, then the adjust my lace cuff maneuver. Next, she sips from an empty glass of wine, trying to play off the growing urgency in her jaw. You can almost hear the inner monologue, "Don't open your mouth. Don't be weak. Think of Greek gods. Think of dessert." But despite her valiant efforts, the yawn wins. Except, she doesn't let it bloom. No, she bites her lip, tightens her jaw, and lets the yawn escape through her nose in a weird little wheeze. It sounds like a tired mouse being polite. You watch this miniature war unfold 5 more times over the next hour. It's like a ballet of facial suppression. Everyone in the room is doing something absurd to avoid the ultimate shame. One man pinches his thigh under the table. Another drinks so much water you're pretty sure he's just using it to keep his mouth busy. And the irony? No one's fooled. Everyone knows what's going on. They're just all pretending it isn't. Historians still debate whether people in these settings genuinely feared being punished for yawning, or if it was more about social survival. After all, being labeled vulgar or unsophisticated was a kind of soft death in aristocratic circles. What's clear is that anti-yawn culture became its own performance. Entire books were written on proper comportment that included yawning tips. If you must yawn, do so in solitude. If caught mid-yawn, turn it into a discreet sigh. And for the love of Louis XIV, never yawn upward because showing the roof of your mouth was practically scandalous. Some even carried scented fans, not just to cool off, but to discreetly cover their mouths during involuntary expressions, basically fashionable muzzle. But while all this sounds exhausting, it's also quietly hilarious. You begin to wonder how many elegant portraits from this era were painted during near-yawn emergencies. Those tight lips, those serious gazes maybe, they're just clenching against the inevitable. In the back of the room, a harpsichord player misses a note. A pause, a flicker of eyes. Someone almost yawns. But the music starts again just in time. Crisis averted. As you step back out into the night air, your own jaw stretches involuntarily. You cover it, out of habit, and laugh softly at yourself. Even centuries later, the fear of the improper yawn still echoes a little. And yet, for all their discipline, their lace-wrapped pride, those nobles weren't as pure as they pretended. You're about to find out just how sneaky a countess could get. Python. Sauchep. Ching Sua. You're in the garden of a grand estate now, just outside Paris. Lanterns swing gently from the trees, casting warm amber light across manicured hedges and overly symmetrical fountains. It's a private gathering, intimate, exclusive, and tastefully boring. You blend in among the powdered wigs and embroidered waistcoats, keeping your eyes peeled for something scandalous. And there it is. A countess draped in pastel silk and diamonds that probably have their own property deed sits on a velvet bench, nodding ever so slightly as a man beside her recites a poem about wheat. Yes, wheat. You can almost feel her soul trying to climb out of her body. Then, it happens. She yawns. But wait, this is no ordinary yawn. This is an aristocratic masterclass in covert fatigue. She lifts her lace fan at just the right moment, hiding the movement entirely. To everyone else, it looks like a simple breeze break, a dainty flick of the wrist, but behind the fan, her jaw is on a full stretch, her eyes glistening with tearful surrender. And when the yawn ends, she lowers the fan, sips her champagne, and nods with regal calm, as if she's just pondered something philosophical about grain harvests. You start to notice it everywhere. Lords and ladies have developed entire techniques, secret yawning arts passed down like family recipes. One nobleman fakes a cough to mask a yawn. Another adjusts his wig so dramatically, you'd think he was warding off bees, but no, it's just cover for a mouth stretch. Historians still argue whether these moments were quietly tolerated among nobles, or if they all lived in fear of one another's judgment. After all, society at this level was built on illusion. The illusion of refinement, of immunity to discomfort, of having transcended human needs. But here, in the corners of the garden, beneath candlelight and fan shadows, the truth leaks out. The Countess yawns again, this time behind her gloved hand. The Baron next to her does a quick blink-yawn combo, like a cat, pretending not to be tired. You begin to suspect that behind every tight-lipped aristocrat's face is a suppressed scream of exhaustion. And the hypocrisy? Thick as the velvet drapes inside. You remember Claude, the baker from earlier, who got sentenced to write a poem just for being tired in public. Meanwhile, these nobles yawn away behind silk and sequins, shielded by status. One evening, an observer even wrote in a private diary about a duchess who, during a royal concert, let out a yawn so epic it made a candle flicker. But instead of being punished, she was complimented on her graceful breath control. Of course she was. This double standard wasn't just about yawning, it ran deep through every part of noble life. The rules applied downward, to the commoners, the tired, the overworked. Those who couldn't afford fans, gloves, or plausible deniability. You lean against a stone balustrade, watching as another nobleman excuses himself to stretch his legs code, you now realize, for finding a corner to yawn in peace. By this point, the whole law feels like an elaborate joke played by the powerful on the exhausted, a performative punishment maintained only by the illusion that nobles were different, cleaner, sharper, less sleepy. But they weren't. They were just better at hiding it. You wake early the next morning, or as early as one can in a dreamlike wander through 17th century Paris. The streets are quieter now, dew clings to the railings, and the city feels momentarily honest. It's here, at this quieter hour, that you follow a young clerk to the public square because apparently there's been another yawn. A man in modest clothes stands on a raised wooden platform, red in the face. Not from anger, no, he's embarrassed, because his punishment is underway, not the stocks, not jail. Worse, public poetry. The punishment reads like a parody, after being caught yawning just once. During a royal tax announcement, this man has been sentenced to read aloud a 4-line verse, written by himself, on the dangers of public fatigue. With rhymes, he clears his throat. When ears are tired, mouths stretch wide, but yawns offend the lords of pride. Next time I'll nod, or bite my cheek, to spare myself this shameful week. A scattered laugh echoes from the crowd. A few people clap, but it's the nervous, don't make eye contact kind of clap. You can tell their torness is funny, but it could be them next week. This isn't the only odd penalty floating around town. There are whispered stories of people made to wear sloth caps, floppy velvet hats shaped like drooping mouths. One rumor even mentions a teacher who had to teach an entire class, using only synonyms for alert, as if that would rewire students into never yawning again. Historians still debate whether these punishments were meant to shame or simply entertain the ruling class. Some claim it was all theatre discipline dressed up as pageantry. Others insist it was sincere, a last-ditch effort to control the uncontrollable. And you have to wonder, how did something so involuntary, so benign, become a thing to fear? As you walk away from the square, past children mimicking the poet with exaggerated yawns, the absurdity lingers. The law isn't just about mouths opening, it's about keeping people small. You drift now toward the aging heart of the city, where ivy coils around old walls, and every step echoes with the ghosts of old rules. By this point, you've seen yawns punished, smothered, hidden behind fans, turned into poetry, and still you wonder, how did this law last so long? You pass by an old municipal office where faded parchments hang under glass. One of them, barely legible, includes a clause tucked into a broader set of conduct decrees that reads something like, "Any visible expression of fatigue in the presence of order shall be considered disrespectful and subject to civic reprimand." It doesn't even say yawn outright anymore, just fatigue, polished into abstraction. Because that's what happened. Over time, the law wasn't about yawning at all. It became a symbol of obedience. A quiet test. Could you sit perfectly still? Could you look interested, awake, composed even, when every bone in your body screamed otherwise? Historians still argue whether the law was ever actively enforced after the 18th century, or if it just faded into the legal background one of those absurd leftovers no one bothers to repeal. But somehow, even centuries later, people still whispered about it. Teachers scolded students for slouching like peasants. Priests asked parishioners to respect the Lord with posture. Generations learned to sit up straight and suppress the yawn. And maybe the law persisted not on paper, but in behavior. Even now, in your world of Zoom meetings and corporate webinars, haven't you caught yourself holding back a yawn on camera, biting your lip, forcing your eyes open just a little longer? You're not afraid of being fined, sure, but there's still that little flicker of shame, isn't there? Because somehow, deep down, we've kept the idea that being tired is a weakness, that showing it is unprofessional, impolite, embarrassing. But really, why? You wander through a courtyard where pigeons coo like half-asleep witnesses to centuries of nonsense. A young girl chases a hoop through the stones, her laughter echoing across time. And for a moment, the old law seems like a dream itself, silly, distant, and yet familiar. Because even now, in ways subtle and quiet, we still live with traces of this absurdity. And maybe, just maybe, it's time we forgave ourselves a yawn.